So the theme of this cycle is you, me, we. So there's you and your needs, and then there's me and my needs, and then there's that space between us that we have to coexist. Where are the places where we're hyper empathetic and taking on things that are not really ours? Where are the places where we need to assert those boundaries to kind of carve out and affirm ourselves? And that's whether we're talking about, of course, romantic relationships, but big one for parenting relationships. I know I run into this all the time because I feel all the feels of my daughter, and then that gets in the way of me being able to discipline properly because her pain is my pain, and that whole big hullabaloo. It's the same thing that comes into impact when we're working with work relationships and business partnerships. It's this boundary between the self and other, and how do I navigate the idea that there's a you and a me and also a we, and that those are three different things that require different boundaries.
And there are three signs that people really should think twice about crossing. Venus has what we call authority or dignity in these three signs. In Libra, she rules. In Capricorn, she has what we call triplicity dignity. And then Pisces, she's exalted in. Venus is definitely related to the idea of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, the goddess of connection. Another side of Venus was related to war. She also was honored as a war goddess in Sumeria and even parts of what we now call the Americas. Libra, they think, oh, they're just so nice and indecisive. That is until they're not. And then you're doomed. They kind of put you on their scales. And because they're an air sign, they can think through pretty cleanly and clearly how to fuck you up.
Whenever people talk about Venus, I think about Oshun, you know, and I love the hold up video with Beyonce.
Oh my God. With the bat?
Because that's the other side of Oshun. It's like, I'm unfuckwittable. You know, it's like, I can be sweet, I can be honey, I can be all of those things, but I'm going to stay on my throne. Yeah. And that's just what it is.
Absolutely.
So with the new moon on the 28th, what does this new moon usher in for all of us collectively as it relates to Libra?
Yeah, so I mean, when we're talking about Libra, we can't talk about this in a vacuum. Like what we normally like to do is to talk about how these things exist along an axis between the new moon, full moon, between the idea of Libra and we're talking about Aries. And one way to think about these two things is that they both prompt us to think about how we have to be at the balancing between independence and I won't say dependence as much as cooperation or consideration. And Libra is where we're dealing with the consideration part. How are we considering things and being not even just polite, but cooperative in our relationship? So Libra is going to be dealing with how we're, especially the new moon, how we are dealing with our relationships, how we're dealing with fundamental issues of justice. One of the words I also like to use with Libra is ratio. And ratio taps into the proportion between things, how you're weighing things, rationality, and even the idea of justice, right? You know, in terms of how we have those things. Beauty is also about ratio. And then also in art, you know, whether we're talking about the golden ratio, the golden mean, all those things really relate to how we have the ratio between things. One thing is to kind of figure out, well, what's our portion? Are we willing to take our due portions? I often see many women, you know, who deny themselves their due portions, whether in terms of their work, you know, and even when I was growing up, not so much in my household, but when I would go to other households, how the woman would serve everyone else and then like get a smaller plate and go off to herself and eat. And I was like, that's not just.
This shifting idea of what the feminine can look like, about, you know, this other side of Venus, this other side of Oshun, this kind of badass side that doesn't really serve patriarchy so much. And even in relationships, when you're talking about proportion and balance, what it makes me think about as we're moving into this cycle, think about partnerships that, you know, the balance isn't always 50-50. sometimes it's 70-30 over here, 60-40 over here. And it's based on like what creates harmony and how can I fully tune into what I deserve and what I can give in the balance of this relationship.
And also what you've earned. I'm a big,
Earned.
yeah. I mean, because deserve can always get into like touchy language, but earn, one can see like what you put in and what you should get out.
And I think that kind of reflects on the full moon too, because I think with the Aries, it's what I earn, what I deserve, what's mine, what I can advocate for, what I can fight for.
Well, yeah, Aries is more about the idea of courage, right? So it's balancing between courage and consideration that we get more the fulcrum point of interdependence. And so when we come to the Aries moon, it's more about how do I have the courage to affirm myself? How am I affirmed from others? Not just in terms of my proportion, my ratio, but also in terms of how you're giving what's unique about you, the sense of yourself, how you're interjecting that sense of self into the world and paying attention to that, how it's also received.
Well, one of the things that we're looking at this cycle, whether we're talking about it from the perspective of Libra and Aries, which would be from an astrological viewpoint, from a 5-element perspective, we're looking at the polarity between the wood element and the earth element.
Right.
And the wood element is about the self. It's the I. It's the how do I go for mine, get what I want. And the emotion associated with the wood element is anger.
Is it the liver? Is the liver?
It's the liver. Okay. And it's also the sound or the voice that's associated with the wood element is shouting. In the classics, it's called shouting. So it's this very, even if the person's voice's volume isn't particularly loud, it's a very direct Aryan way of kind of coming right at it that you're almost like, whoa, those words, versus the earth element, which is about community and family and harmony and cooperation and collaboration, and the sound of the earth element voice is singing, almost like a lullaby.
Oh.
So,
and what organ is that in the body?
The spleen and stomach.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So here we are in the earth element. Seasonally, we're in the earth element. And the spleen and the stomach and the digestion, and we're thinking about how do I nurture and nourish life? It's the apple. If we're looking at the cycle of the elements, it's like the fruit. It's the nourishment. It's the, it's sweet. The taste associated with the earth element is sweetness. And so in order to have a real self, whether we're talking about independently or in relationship, that balance between the earth and the wood element has to be in proportion. So I think, I love it when this happens, when these indigenous systems kind of sync right up, whether we're talking Libra Aries, we're talking wood or earth, there's still this balance between I, me, and we that we're all navigating, whether we're a Libra rising, a Libra moon, wherever Libra falls for us. That was actually a question I had for you. What for the folks who say, I don't have Libra in my chart, or they don't know if they have Libra in their chart, how does this new moon cycle relate to them?
The key thing to know is that all 12 signs of the zodiac are embedded in your chart. It's just a matter of where they are and what proportion they're represented in your chart.
So all of the signs are all part of our psyche. It's
absolutely.
Just that we live into them, become conscious of them, play them out in the dance.
Right. And as kind of like stepping stones, as more, conduits toward understanding ourselves and our place in the cosmos. Mm-hmm. Because, the key message of astrology is that we are divine. And so we are both part of this cosmos and then beyond the cosmos, right, in that sense. So it's kind of, when I hear someone say like, oh, and I've been saying like, we're Scorpios. Well, that's more convenience, right? We have suns in Scorpio. You just have placements in that by which you identify with, but you could choose to identify with all of it, which I think is the key development.
Which is the movement towards wholeness.
Correct.
Right? Because the chart is a circle. And
Exactly.
the integration of all of those aspects of the self is what we're really looking at.
That's
And I think
exactly
that
right.
that's also important when we're looking at this theme, you, me, and we, when we're working with flower essences, because, you know, it's recognizing that sometimes the conflict that comes up as we look at boundaries, as we look at relationships, as we look at where you end and where I begin, is that that conflict is essentially trying to get us to move towards a new wholeness, to integrate a new aspect of ourselves.
That's
So if we
beautiful.
just run from conflict, like, oh, got a conflict, can't deal with this person, then we don't have a chance to integrate or learn whatever it is that is being awakened in that conflict. Just one more thing that I wanted to mention with the earth element and the season of the earth element. Each of the elements has an emotion that's associated with it. And, you know, when we get to the earth element, you know, we know that the wood element is anger. We know that the water element is fear. There's a lot of, I would say, discourse around what is the emotion of the earth element. And so sometimes people translate it as overthinking. Sometimes people translate it as anxiety or worry. But the way that I like to think about the emotion of the earth element is resonance. So,
Resonance.
resonance, the capacity to feel with the vibration of another person. And so I use the analogy of a guitar. So for our music lovers out there, if you have two perfectly tuned guitars, if you pluck the guitar string on one guitar, then the other C string on the other guitar will also resonate and
Resonate.
vibrate. And that's what we're looking at with the earth element, my capacity to resonate with, to share with, to be in the same vibration as another person. And so one of the things that we're going to be looking at this cycle is empathy. So one of the books that I really love is this book called The Art of Empathy. And for those of us who are a little more mythologically oriented, you could look at any of the Octavia Butler books, Wild Seed, Mind of My Mind, Pattern Master, so many favorites, because she usually has a main character that has hyper empathy. And so that's a great archetypal way to kind of start to see how the earth element and the resonance of the earth element lands in us, and then particularly how you bring that back into your relationships. Either you got too much of it, or you don't have enough of it and you lack compassion and your words are a little too sharp and a little too harsh, or, you know, you're trying to find the right proportion or the right balance or ratio of that empathy and that resonance. So
Yeah.
what we'll be up to. So anything else?
No, I mean, if people, like I said, if people want to connect with me, they can connect via unlockastrology@gmail.com or unlockastrology.com. It's SF Reynolds on Twitter and Instagram.
You can find me on IG and Facebook at Oceans and Rivers. And our new manifestation order window, if you want to work with the flower essences and the special goodies in our kit, please order by September 24th so that we can get that magic and medicine kit to you before the new moon on the 28th, so you can start off the new moon with all of your rituals in place. So,
all right.
thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for having me.